Hi again then guys, and welcome to the 16th pick in my series of 30 vehicles which I would love to see feature at some point at least on Gran Turismo. Some of these cars that have already been featured in the series have already been featured on Gran Turismo at some point, such as the Renault Space F1. Others have been featured on some racing games, but not necessarily Gran Turismo. And others, as far as I'm aware at least, have never officially been featured on any racing game. Now, as far as I know, this car in particular is one of those. I may be wrong, there may be some obscure DLC pack or game that features this car, but as far as I'm aware, this car hasn't been featured on at least a major racing game, if any racing game. And the car is the 1950s Maserati 450S Zagato Costin Coupe. It's got a pretty impressive name. Is it an impressive car? Well, as I've mentioned before on my channel, I'm a huge Maserati fan. I already, of course, featured another Maserati in this series, the pretty obvious choice of the MC12, which I think a lot of people would love to see on Gran Turismo. This car, though, is far less obvious a choice. But interestingly enough, this car, although you've probably never heard of it, is one of the most significant Maseratis ever, and also possibly the rarest Maserati road car ever built, because there is only one. Now, the car, as many Maseratis were, was born from a passion for motorsport, in a very similar way to most Ferraris. Not so much these days, but back then, the 50s, 60s, and to some degree onward, but not so much, most Maseratis and Ferraris by far were designed to compete in some form of motorsport. And 450S from Maserati was a strong race car. It initially came with a 6-cylinder engine. It was later changed to a 4.5 litre V8 with around 400 horsepower. And it was a serious racing machine, a fantastic looking car, and one of my personal favourite classic racing cars. Now, the 450S has not been, to my knowledge, featured on a racing game. There is a Maserati race car featured on Forza Motorsport, the 300S, but not the 450S. And this is a car which looks fantastic and is one of probably the most popular classic Italian cars, one of the classic Italian race cars that stands out the most, certainly. And the 450S, the Zagato Costin version in particular, was born out of a desire to go to the Le Mans. It was driven by Stirling Moss, and in order to go to the Le Mans and prove successful, Stirling Moss recommended to Maserati that they enlist the help of an aerodynamic designer by the name of Frank Costin, who had also designed some other Grand Prix cars, such as the Van Wall GPR. And it was a clever idea, because open-top race cars, by definition, are wind traps, and that can really affect top speed. That air going into the car's body really restricts you. So turning it into a coupe, although adding some weight, will often drastically improve your top speed and high-speed stability, and also, considering that every lap of the Le Mans features an extremely high-speed section, that's a lot of wind on the driver all the time. So if you can reduce that, the driver's going to be in much better shape, and not being buffeted around by the wind is certainly a good advantage to have. Now, the car's powered by roughly the same 4.5 litre 400 horsepower V8 as featured in the normal 450S. It's slightly heavier, as you'd expect, being with a roof and a slightly extended rear end. But, funnily enough, it wasn't a success. Despite the fact that the concept was sound, the practice was flawed. Because although Stirling Moss managed to keep the car in second place, second to another Maserati in fact, he didn't actually manage to finish. In fact, neither of the Maseratis did. They were both a DNF due to mechanical issues, which is unfortunate. But The real weird thing was that the coupe, the Zagato Costin coupe, was actually slower than the open-top version already was. So what went wrong? Well, quite simply, it was the time frame. They were only given 2 weeks to do the conversion to the car. It was designed by Costin, coach built by Zagato, and they just didn't have enough time to fully complete it, most notably an underbody section which would have virtually completed the design. And that made all the difference. And it's a shame. It's one of those stories which happens quite often in racing, where something had amazing potential but didn't quite get the chance, usually due to a short time frame, to actually achieve it. And that is very unfortunate. However, the Zagato Costin coupe was then converted into road spec. It was repainted from the racing red to a black. It received a full road spec interior, and it was sold to a private buyer. And up until now, I believe it's now owned by a Maserati collector from 2002 onward. Why is it a notable car then? Because to all intents and purposes it was pretty much a failure as far as racing goes. Well, for a couple of reasons. One, it is the ultimate Maserati, technically speaking. It's a one-off, it's a road car, and it's an incredible machine in terms of the potential that it had and the way it looks. It is an absolute masterpiece of classic car design. It looks like almost a mix of classic and racing styles in one vehicle. And interestingly enough, there are some people who do believe, strongly so, that the Zagato Costin coupe is actually the world's first supercar. Other notable vehicles from that time period would include the Mercedes 300 SL Gullwing. Now, there were extremely fast versions of the Gullwing made, generally the open-top racing versions, but to my knowledge, none of the road versions could match that pace. Whereas with the Maserati, the road car actually was as quick as the race version, especially when they actually finished building it. Now, interestingly enough, the car was built for an American buyer, and the wheelbase was extended by 10 inches in order for him to be able to fit into the car. So it has a very long appearance compared to the standard 450S. It's much more than just giving the car a roof, as you can see from the pictures. But I personally think it's an absolutely fantastic looking car. It has an almost Batman-esque, kind of a gothic, Tim Burton kind of feel to the car. Almost like a sporty hearse. It's such a strange looking car, but at the same time, in my opinion at least, absolutely fantastic looking. And somehow, a car which is so based on having curved edges around the lights, the windscreen, the shape itself, manages to pull off having square windows. That's incredible. They don't ruin the design. Now, that's only a small thing, of course, but I think that's incredible. It's an amazingly eclectic car. It looks completely unique from every angle. There is quite simply no other classic car or modern car which looks quite like it. And in effect, it is a fusion, as some cars technically already are on GranTurismo, of race car and road car. And that's something which used to happen far more often than it does today, because the rules of racing, etc., used to be far more lenient, and you could essentially take a road car racing or have a race car road registered. That's not really possible anymore for the most part, not without major modifications, but back then you could make a road car that was essentially a repainted version of the car that raced last weekend. And that's a fantastic gimmick to have. And I'm all for gimmicks. I think gimmicks are fantastic. So if this car were on the game, it would be kind of difficult to judge what the PP would be, to be honest. I would say easily north of 500, maybe around 520, 530 perhaps. Possibly that kind of region. I would probably say closer to 520. And as far as price, well, it's the most exotic Maserati road car ever made. So it could quite easily have a price of 9 or 10 million, if not more. I mean, I would happily pay 25 million credits for this car. I don't think many other people would though, so I think 9 or 10 million would probably be a little bit more realistic. In fact, 9 million credits would seem about right. It's a unique number. There are, as far as I can remember at the moment, no other cars on Gran Turismo that cost 9 million credits, and it would give the car a unique, but at the same time big enough price tag to recognise both its historical significance as potentially the world's first supercar, and also as, technically speaking, the most exotic Maserati ever made. And, as it happens, being essentially a road version of a race car with superior top-end performance when it's built properly, it's not going to be a slouch either. You can expect a top speed of easily over 170, 180 on Gran Turismo. The acceleration may not be amazing, but it has a 5-speed gearbox to work with as standard, so we could quite easily work with that and make it an incredibly quick little machine, especially based on how quick the classic cars on Gran Turismo already are. And considering that this car has 400 horsepower to begin with, that is not to be sniffed at, especially in the 1950s. And this is not a particularly heavy car either, so to have that much power, we could quite easily tune this car up to the high 500 to possibly even the 600 horsepower region, and imagine the kind of speed you could get out of it. The front end would probably be a little bit light on Special Stage Route X, but I would easily imagine this could be up there with the Lamborghini Miura, the P4, the GT40, etc. for top speed, easily in excess of 240, if not more. So, slightly different pick this time. I don't go for so many classic cars in my top 30 wish list, although I am a huge fan of classic cars. But to me, this is just one classic car which I couldn't do a top 30 list without including. It's not a car that I necessarily talk about all the time, but it is a classic which I hold in very high esteem. I absolutely love the design of, and one which can actually back up its price with performance. But that's it overall for this particular pick. If you are, of course, new to this series, be sure to slap down below what cars you would like to see on a future Gran Turismo game. And now, of course, it has been confirmed that Gran Turismo Sport is not Gran Turismo 7. Gran Turismo 7 is still coming after GT Sport. So what cars do you think will be on GT Sport? What cars do you think may not make it in? Because GT Sport could well end up having less cars than a normal Gran Turismo game. So what cars do you think might not make the cut? But that's it overall for this pick. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.